Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. I miss you, bud. You spent so much time in Nashville. I'm not used to doing these things on Zoom anymore.
I
You
know,
got
I
your next
know.
trip planned?
Well, it's funny. The last one, I guess I got there Sunday late afternoon, so had a little dinner, and then for 3 days I was at camp. It was an awesome 3 days, and I made it a point to come for the first 2 days, as you know, of padded practices, because I always think those are just more interesting in terms of watching guys compete. Because I think, look, the one thing about training camp is obviously they're working on tactical, schematic things. We know that. But one of the main things about camp, and you're well aware of this because I know that coaches, when they do have press conferences, speak about the intensity level. That's one thing that you really look for when the pads come on, is you want to see guys compete. Are they going to make mistakes, fundamental mistakes? Are they going to blow an assignment? Are they sure? Because it's training camp and they're still learning all the install stuff. Don't forget, they install new things every day late in the afternoon and then work on them the next day when they're on the field. So guys are going to make a mistake here and there. That's just human nature. But it's the intensity level that you're looking for. That's one of the things that I look for and try to take away from it. I would never say a guy's not trying. I love when people say things like that. You have no idea that you have to be in a guy's head. I would never say that. But when the intensity level is high, you can feel it. As you well know, you've been to enough practices to know that when the intensity level is high, you can feel it. I, for one, particularly enjoy watching the one-on-ones, the receivers versus the corners. That gets guys juiced. The pass rush drills where the O line has to pass protect, that gets guys juiced because you don't want, no one wants to get beat one-on-one. That's just the nature. You're not a professional athlete if you're okay getting beat one-on-one.
Exactly right. And especially with these joint training camp practices, Greg, so much more, I think, obviously for guys trying to make rosters, the preseason
Yeah.
games are very valuable and good to, give dudes an opportunity to put something on film for if they get cut at one spot, they can maybe land at the next. But we're down here in Tampa right now for the audience's
Yeah.
edification. For joint training camp practices with the Bucks yesterday, and then they'll have a preseason game as we tape this on a Friday morning tomorrow night in Tampa. And just the electricity in the air when dudes see a different color jersey than
Oh,
they're used to looking at for a month at this point, 2 months going back to OTAs and things like that. And for the Titans, Greg, they've had them in pads, fully padded practices now for 7 consecutive practices, including down here in Tampa yesterday. And there was a lot of good work gotten by both sides. Really, really enjoyed that level of intensity and seeing the way that not just the players respond to it, but the coaches, because God knows they're
coaches.
competitive too. It was a fun chess match between Titans offense, Bucks defense, and vice versa yesterday.
And my guess is there's some unscripted stuff, right? Where you don't know. And see, to me, that's what I saw obviously when I was down there last week. The last day I was there, which was a Wednesday, they did 3 unscripted sessions to end the Wednesday practice. And to me, those are the most intriguing because that's a game. Because the offense doesn't know what the defense is going to call, the defense doesn't know what the offense is going to call, and you just go out and you play and you have to react. And that to me is where you learn a lot. In many ways, these practices are better than the preseason games for the coaches. They learn more. You know, the preseason games, obviously, they're games, and you want to see guys execute well. No coach wants to see a guy execute poorly, but there's also a learning element to every day during training camp. They want to see guys rep, and there's going to be mistakes, and that's why there's meetings. Look, I don't know if maybe fans know this, maybe they don't know this, but when they practiced, when I was down there because of the heat, they practiced at 8 a.m. As you know, you were there. And they were over at 10, 10:15. That's not the end of the day. I mean, these guys are not going home at noon. They're there all day, sitting in meetings, going over. Fans might not realize how incredibly mental all this stuff is. It's not just getting out there and hitting people. That's the nature of the sport, obviously, but it's so mental. And that's what, I've done this before where I've been to training camps, as you well know. I mean, this will be my 46th year at NFL Films. I created the matchup show in the mid 1980s, so it's been a few years, Buck. So I've done this. It wasn't my first rodeo, as they say.
Hmm.
But the mental part always blows me away. It's just such a mental game, and that's the way coaches see it.
Oh, and it goes back to one of my favorite lines, and I'm sure Coach Dave McGinnis has gotten this from so many different stops and so many different coaches he's been around
Yep.
across his lifetime. But Mac always says football's not hard; it's just incredibly detailed. And to nail down the specificity of those details is what they spend the hours upon hours in the meeting rooms after the fact doing.
It's so funny you said that because for years and years, we had the broadcast boot camp here at NFL Films for the first 13 years, and I was always an instructor in the boot camp for all these guys that were either present players or former players who wanted to get into the media business. They've since moved it to LA, so I haven't been a part of it for the last number of years, which is fine. It was a great 13-year run. And, you know, I spent my career, and this is true with TV and media executives and radio executives as well. When people tell me that, oh, it's so complicated, and I always tell these guys just what Coach Mack said. I said, no, it's not complicated. It's just detailed.
Hmm.
And I always viewed my job in talking football and coaches as well is that you take the detail and you try to present it as clearly and concisely as possible. That's what you're trying to, there's a term I remember um, John Gruden when I spoke to him at length when I did the book with Ron Jaworski years ago, and John Gruden, and I know he's been at practice down with in Tampa because that's his home. And he said you're always trying to present to the other side, whether it's offense or defense, you're trying to present the illusion of complexity, but in reality, for you, you're trying to make it simple.
Yeah.
So that's really what coaches try to do, but they have to teach it. And you've got to teach it to a lot of different players, as you know. Some guys are super intelligent. Some guys have average intelligence. Some guys are slower. It's like any business. Everybody has to get it. So it's not complex. It's just detailed. And how do you present the detail?
Yeah, you're part coach, you're part teacher, you're part pop
Yep.
psychologist in some of these situations. It's a
Yep.
a fascinating business for sure. And to your point, Greg, about the time that you spent here, both in the off-season program and then last week in training camp, I wonder just for the audience, what one of the larger takeaways that you had from the time, whether that's a philosophical approach that you maybe saw or considered, or something from a player standpoint, whatever you might be comfortable sharing from your time here that the audience may benefit from knowing.
Well, I think I've already expressed part of it. To me, the thing that, as I said, I knew this, but because I was there and it really stood out to me was the mental element that's involved. That's what really stands out to me. I mean, fans, may not understand this. And when I first learned this, going back years and years, it blew me away. But, every think about defense. I mean, I had the opportunity to talk to some defensive coaches, and there's so many little permutations of defense, that the players have to know. I mean, I was talking to one of the defensive coaches in terms of pressure concepts, where defensive linemen have to drop out. In certain pressure concepts, defensive linemen drop out because they bring linebackers or defensive backs. And where do they drop out? And what their responsibility is when they drop out. There's like 7 different parts to that. And,
Yeah.
they have to know all those things depending on what that specific play call is. So the thing that I always take away is not so much the on the field. I mean, I love the competition. Like I said, I love the one-on-ones. Obviously, I love the 11 on 11 when they're padded because you really can see football. But just the mental part always blows me away, even though I know it. It's one of those things that
Sure.
but it just blows me away at what these guys have to know and the detail. Because not only, let's say on defense, is it 11 guys that have to execute properly, but then it's the individual technique of each player. They have to execute the technique on that given play call properly. And there's different techniques, there's different body positions, there's different hand usage. I mean, depending on what position you're playing. That stuff I find that's always a big takeaway for me at how mental the game is, because look, built into the game, we know it's physical. I don't want to compare it exactly one-on-one to boxing, But it's similar in the sense that for a boxer, you don't just go out and swing wildly and hope you happen to hit a guy in the jaw. That's why they called it the sweet science,
Uh-huh.
because there's ways to go about doing all that with the end result that you hope you can do that. But football is the same way. It's not just Jeffrey Simmons. And by the way, I couldn't believe how great he looked. He lost some weight. Boy, does he look like a, I mean, he
You,
just looks
you and I
phenomenal.
gotta do. You and I gotta think about doing Pilates for if Jeff's doing that as good as he looks. You know what I'm saying?
Geez. I mean, that guy, he just looks unbelievable. But he's not just going out there to say, well, I'm just going to knock the crap out of the guy in front of me. There's a whole technique. Obviously that's the goal, depending on the play. But there's ways to go about doing that. It's hand placement. It's you watch an offensive line coach work, or early in any practice, where they have individual periods. You watch the offensive line coaches work. It's Bill Callahan. I think it's Scott Fuchs, I believe is his name, the
Yep.
assistant, who's been doing it for over 30 years as just offensive line in his whole career. Everything is so precisely detailed. And, that always fascinates me.
Absolutely. So speaking of a level of detail and the intensity of coaching, I thought it'd be fun to present Greg with some of the coordinator changes that we've had in the league this year. Because if you know this podcast, and many of you have been listening with us for Greg, we're going on 5 seasons, 5 NFL seasons, you and me doing this
Well,
stuff.
has it been that long?
I know
Wow.
I know you're tired from carrying me around these last 5 years, Greg. I know. I get it, bud. I understand. But I
Well,
thought
it's funny. A lot of times I get for people that don't like me, let's say after I do something on Twitter, I get a lot of, stuff like, gee, it's time for bed, Grandpa. I get that kind of stuff a lot these days.
I think that's still nicer than what I get on Twitter, but those are
Yeah,
two
yeah, yeah. Well,
different
I'm giving you the nice stuff.
Time for bed, Grandpa. So anyway, for those of you who have listened to the podcast, you know that Greg and I will obviously talk about some stuff that Cam does in the preseason, but for the most part, preseason is not what we are breaking down around here. So I thought it would be good to talk about some of the coaching changes, some of the coordinator changes, and the philosophical things that those coaches
Yeah.
bring in their new landing spots with Greg. So I'll start with the AFC, and we have 6 different teams that change coordinators this year, Greg, with the offense in particular, where it's the Browns and Tommy Rees who come in as the OC this year. The Texans have Nick Caley. Liam Cohen is obviously the head coach of the Jaguars, and Grant Udinsky, I believe, is how you pronounce his OC's name. Then you have Pete Carroll with Chip Kelly, who's a known commodity both at college and pro. Josh McDaniels is back in New England under Mike Vrabel this time around. And then you have the Jets with Aaron Glenn and his offensive coordinator Tanner Eggstrand. So a couple of different new faces or names that the average NFL fan might know,
Yeah.
some known commodities as well, but a lot of different stuff that each of these coaches bring to their new spots.
Yeah, and some of them are guys I don't really know particularly well. I mean, I think that, a guy like Tanner Eggstrom, I mean, I'm trying to remember where did he come from? Because that's where you have to kind of look at, where he came from. And so
Yeah,
what's
so
his
he
sort of
he from Detroit. He was on Dan Campbell's staff, so he came
so
over.
he's been there the whole time.
Yes, he's been there the
So
entire
he was
time
there
since
with Ben
2020, I
Johnson the
believe.
entire time.
Yeah,
So, but see that is a fascinating. I'm going to start right there because we can't go through every single guy,
sure.
obviously. But that's going to be a fascinating deal because that offense, the Ben Johnson offense, which is basically what he's familiar with when you get right down to it. I mean, he's been in the league a little bit. He was, let's see, I'm just looking at his background.
Mhm.
No, he was in college actually. So, and then he was at Michigan as an offensive uh, analyst. He was in the XFL for a year. So he's been with Detroit since 2020. Okay, so that offense is really a difficult offense to teach and learn, and it takes a lot of time because that's an offense that and we're seeing this with Ben Johnson, by the way, with Caleb Williams,
Yes.
which will and people are being too quick to judge that because I knew that would be a work in progress. It would be a process. But the thing about it is they have Justin Fields, and Justin Fields at his core is not a true pocket player, in the sense that let's say Jared Goff is, okay? And there's so much to that offense. There's a lot of verbiage, there's a lot of alerts, there's a lot of two plays called in the huddle, there's a lot of shifts, there's a lot of motions, there's a lot of under center play action, which has to be taught because not a lot of guys are used to playing under center and turning their back to the defense. So my question would be, and we're not going to know the answer to this until we get to the regular season because they're not going to show it in the preseason, is what parts of that offense do they feel Justin Fields can handle, and what parts do they feel that don't fit Justin Fields' game? So that's going to be a fascinating process to watch because this is the experience that Tanner Angstrom has. And one thing I learned from a coach who was in the NFL for 35 years and is a very good friend of mine, he coached with great coaches, and he was a head coach himself briefly, is that coaches coach what they know.
Mhm.
Coaches can't coach what they don't know, and they coach what they know. So this is what Tanner Angstrom knows, and he probably knows it really, really well. But it's Ben Johnson's, offense, and it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out with Justin Fields.
Well, and it's always fun to see the different like branches of the coaching trees that spread out and then develop their own level of tendencies or things like that. Because obviously McVay and Shanahan and Kubiak had so many of these guys, right? And
Yeah.
long before any of these dudes, because NFL coaching has been going on for 100 years at this point in time, like how many different variants of stuff that we have seen before and that guys knew before, how much more variation can be added as they get to different places with different personnel and develop their own level of coaching tendencies and obviously adding a little bit of their own stuff the more time that they spend into the mix. That's always such a
Yeah.
fun part of this.
And you do have to play to your quarterback. I mean, Justin Fields is not Jared Goff. They have different skill sets, but there are some things that you have to be able to do as an NFL quarterback. I mean, you have to be able to make throws from the pocket at some point in time. Now, obviously, Justin Fields will not do that at the same degree of efficiency as Jared Goff, who, you could argue that Jared Goff, maybe Burrow, Goff. I'm probably going to miss a guy here for people listening. Stafford, Goff, Burrow, those three names come to mind as guys who are really good from the pocket. Like that's their game. They're really really good from the pocket. Like I
Mhm.
said, I'm probably missing a guy, but Justin Fields is not that guy. But the bottom line is he still is going to have to be able to make throws from the pocket in critical high leverage situations. When it's 3rd and 9, you can't just drop back and run around on every play. You got to be able to make throws.
Absolutely.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Now, in the NFC, and it may be some similar answers because Ben Johnson and Declan Doyle are obviously going from Detroit to Chicago. So that will be
Right.
worth monitoring as well. And as you brought up Caleb Williams, there have been reports out of Chicago about the level of specificity that they're bringing and how that process has gone. Now, you try not to take too much from training camp reports, obviously, because we're not in the building that way.
Process.
But
Yeah.
the rest of the changes, and when we're doing specifically offense today for the audience's purposes, Schottenheimer and Clayton Adams in Dallas, who have obviously been there. John Morton, who takes over for Ben Johnson, he is formerly of Dan Campbell's staff as well, so expecting
Yeah.
some continuity there. Then you have Kellen Moore, the former Eagles OC, and he's been in other places as well. But he and Doug Nussmeier are going to be running the Saints offense. Kevin Patullo, a promotion on the Eagles offensive staff. The Seahawks change from Ben Grubb to Clint Kubiak, which will be an
Yeah.
interesting thing. And there's another Kubiak who's running the show, or at least helping Kyle Shanahan run the show, in Clay Kubiak with the 49ers. And then out goes Liam Cohen to the Jaguars, and the Buccaneers hire Josh Grizzard, or Grizzard, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, to be their offensive coordinator for Baker Mayfield. Which one of those jumps out most to you, Greg?
I would say ultimately the Grizzard I don't know a ton about. He was with Tampa last year. He was their pass game coordinator. So there's probably some continuity there. But this is what I would say. I think the Seattle one really intrigues me the most because I think Kubiak, the reason I believe that they moved on from Geno and signed Sam Darnold is because the core of that Kubiak offense with his lineage, which is a Shanahan, Kubiak lineage, is put the quarterback under center, run play action, have outside zone be a major factor. Now, Last year, Sam Darnold in Minnesota, I believe, had the second most under center play action dropbacks of any quarterback in the league, and he was outstanding doing it. Outstanding. Because that really defines your reads and your throws, which Darnold has always needed.
Hmm.
So I believe that with Kubiak being in Seattle, they felt that Darnold really fit what they want to get done as an offense. So we'll see how it plays out. But I find that to be really intriguing because of that connection, because of what Darnold did last year in Minnesota.
Yeah, I he the Seahawks are such a fascinating fixture in the landscape of the NFL this year because the
I
NFC West,
agree.
they've not had they may not be the best top to bottom division in football anymore, but it's still such a high level of competitiveness with four teams that
Great
know how to
point.
win.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, we're on the East Coast, so obviously for a lot of people, the NFC West, hey, what's the NFC West? We don't
Not catching a lot of
follow it
Cardinals games live, are you, Greg?
much. Right. But it's a pretty good division, by the way. I mean, it's a very competitive division. You nailed it. You're 100% right.
Well, Greg always nails it, which is why we enjoy these conversations, buddy. It's always good to catch up. See, and next week, obviously we'll do 45 minutes of Titans and Bucks preseason film breakdown, right? You ready for that?
Well, of course, and we're going to break down every play as if it's the defining play of each player's career.
I look forward to your Tim Boyle analysis when next we get together, Greg.
By the way, he's a great guy.
Well, he's got it, and Greg, you could
I
probably
got to
speak to
tell you,
that on a much deeper level than most people because I think it's
yeah.
very easy for fans to see, Tim Boyle in an NFL game and say, oh, well, that guy doesn't belong at
You
the
know,
NFL level, ignoring the thing that you touched on earlier, which is how big a mental component, how important that can be for a team, for a meeting room, and specifically a team with a young quarterback like the
we
Titans.
could talk about this more at another time, as we see Ward playing games. But having two 30-year-old veteran quarterbacks who've been with a lot of different systems, maybe, everybody would agree they're not NFL starters. Like, you don't want to put them out there for 16, 17 games. But you're dealing with two guys with high level intelligence that have been in a lot of quarterback meetings with a lot of different coaches and have a really high level understanding of football.
Yeah, and the value of that. Brian Callahan, who I'm getting ready to run over to the team hotel and do a quick interview for radio with, he's brought up how much of that investment in what they're trying to do that the other two quarterbacks have poured into Ward and how
Oh,
important that's going to be for him.
those guys are super intelligent, both Brandon Allen and Tim Boyle.
No doubt. Well, Greg, I appreciate your time, brother. Look forward to catching up again next week.
Looking forward to it, Buck. Yeah, for sure.